My name is Danny Feingold. I'm the publisher and founder of Capital in Maine. And I started Capital in Maine almost 15 years ago with a unique mission to report deeply on economic inequality, which really means reporting on economic power, who has it, who doesn't, and what other institutions that believe, like we do, that number one, inequality and climate change are two of the greatest challenges facing our country and the world. And number two, that there are big gaps in the reporting on those issues that need to be filled, and in particular need to be filled by a news outlet that has a strong commitment to accountability, journalism, and to reaching beyond the choir with its content so that we can share the stories that are shaping people's lives with as many people as we can.
Does your journalistic independence ever hit a wall with your funding?
Look, anyone who's in the news business knows that there is no such thing as a business model free from any external influence. If somebody tells you that, then go put a fact checker on that story. That said, we're very clear with all of our funders that we are an independent news organization and we report on the facts and we let the facts guide us. And if a story makes a funder unhappy, then they have the choice of continuing to fund us or not funding us. But at the end of the day, our value to the public is the fact that we're trustworthy, that when they read a Capital and Main story, they know that we've invested really significant time and that while we may have a perspective that informs our reporting, at the end of the day, we're presenting fair, accurate information.
And speaking to the public, how do you attract an audience?
Of course, all of our content is published on our website, capitalandmain.com. That's one way that people can find our content. But we have other ways as well. And this is essential in a time when audiences have so many different places to go for information. Some of it may not be accurate information, but you have to go to where the audience is. So we deploy a number of strategies that allow us to reach a large and very diverse audience. One of the most successful strategies that we use is an extensive network of co-publishing partners. To give you a sense of scale, in 2025, Capital in Maine had more than 2,000 placements of its stories in other news outlets in California, across the country, and also internationally. We're talking about more than 350 news outlets that carried Capital in Maine stories, everyone from USA Today, the LA Times, Rolling Stone, Fortune. So big national brands to leading state outlets like the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Texas Tribune, to papers of record in countless communities across the country. And so our goal is to be able to reach a wide, diverse audience with deeply reported content that gives them something that they're unlikely to find in another news publication.
And are you compensated for that?
The media ecosystem circa 2026 is such that too many publications are just hanging on. And what they need more than anything else is content that's either cheap or free of charge. For us, this is not a monetary relationship. It serves two purposes. One is for us to reach as wide an audience as we can with our reporting. And number two, and this is something we've come to understand just in the last few years, is that we are playing now a pivotal role in supporting the larger media news system by, in fact, giving outlets the ability to publish content they otherwise couldn't publish and really to survive. Because if you're not publishing content as a news outlet, you have no other functions. So we see this now as part of our mission.
Like a wire service, almost a free wire service.
In some ways,
Yeah.
we've cultivated individual relationships, though, with hundreds of outlets. And with a handful of those, they're not just republishing or co-publishing our coverage, they're also collaborating editorially with us. So we have editorial partnerships with, for example, the LA Times, with ProPublica, with a number of outlets. And so that kind of flexibility, that nimbleness to say, we want to partner with you, we want to help you, and you can help us is now I would say, the mainstream ethos in more and more newsrooms, which is diametrically opposed to an earlier era where the news business was nothing if not cutthroat.
Are you using social or newsletters or events?
No, absolutely. We drive traffic to our website through all or most of the social media platforms. We're very active on at least half a dozen of those platforms. We also have, in the last year and a half, developed a robust short video capacity. So we produce, on average, a video every week or 2 weeks
Mhm.
of usually 1 to 2 minutes long, and it's a snapshot of a longer story that Capital and Main has produced. And those videos, because so many people now prefer to get their news through visual media rather than just written content, that has dramatically expanded our audience. And those videos are largely distributed on social media. You can find them on our website as well. We have a weekly newsletter that also provides a way for people to easily access our coverage. I will also say that we do occasional live events where we invite people to come and join us either in person or virtually, and be part of a conversation about the coverage that we're producing. We've done that in partnership with other news outlets like ProPublica. We've done it with other organizations. And it's something that we think will be a significant part of Capital Main's model of engagement moving forward.
Do you see your model as a way forward for continuing to have local news and investigative reporting?
Yes, the model that we've developed, I think, has elements that we would love for other news outlets to emulate. I already talked about the co-publishing, republishing model. That's not used by enough outlets. And we have actually developed a template for a training to show other organizations how you do it because it's not quite as simple as it seems, but it's achievable. And it's a way for news organizations to support each other and to move their content out to bigger audiences. The video production element is also something that many news organizations are doing, some doing it better than others. We believe that high production value is important so that you're giving people not just any content, but you're giving them content that is delivered in a format that is easy to digest and at the same time sophisticated in its delivery and in its content. And there's a number of other strategies that we're starting to develop that we think will point the way for us and hopefully for other news organizations that are interested in innovation. I will say, Peter, that if you're a news organization in 2026 and you're not constantly innovating or trying to experiment, then your days are probably numbered. We're well past the era where you can simply show up and produce strong news content and hope to survive. You have to be restless, I would say, restlessly creative. and ambitious and but also smart and strategic.
My kids get their news from Channel 5, basically YouTube channels. Are your 2-minute videos going to be enough to hook those people and hopefully have them have a deeper engagement with the news than this sort of flashy influencer based model?
What you described is very accurate, and it's all the more reason why serious news organizations have to be in the business of understanding audiences and how they're consuming content. You can't put your head in the sand and say, I wish it was the way it used to be. That's not going to cut it. And so, if you're not in the game, if you're not creating content that has an opportunity at least to reach audiences where they are, then you're not going to succeed. And what we're doing today, if we do this interview a year from now, we'll have probably developed two or three new ideas on how to reach audiences. And the same will be true in 2 years and 3 years and so forth. That's the nature of the news business today. What hasn't changed, though, and I think this is equally important, is the fundamentals of good news reporting are what they always were. That you have to find stories that are not being well told already, because there's no point in replicating content. You have to develop sources, you have to develop trust with communities, and you have to tell compelling stories that are relevant to people's lives. And then you have to invest real resources in editing and fact checking and proofreading so that you are holding up a standard that hopefully can compete with content that doesn't adhere to those standards. And that's core to what Capital and Main is doing.
And speaking of resources, what's the staff to contractor ratio?
We are a staff of 15 currently. We've grown very significantly over the last 5 years. We started out with almost no resources and have built steadily over the last decade plus.
Right, I saw
We
you
have
have just hired a audience engagement person too, right?
We did, and that is an absolutely crucial position, as most publishers will tell you. If you don't have an audience engagement person, then you're going to be behind the eight ball. So, yes, we brought on some amazing talent, and I will say, because it's relevant to the conversation and the larger discussion about the state of news, is that several of our staff came from the LA Times, a once great publication that still produces strong content, but less than it used to because of the draconian cuts. But Capital Maine has been in a position to be able to provide a home for outstanding journalists who came from the LA Times and other outlets and who want to produce meaningful work that at the end of the day can help shape the public conversation and ultimately contribute in some way to the betterment of society.
And outside of the 15 core staff members, you have contractors also that are working for you?
We do. We have a number of folks who write for us as columnists, and of course, we use freelance writers as well. And they're an important part of our operation. I think it's crucial to any news organization that wants to be able to reflect the communities that they're covering to actually draw from those communities. And we work hard to bring people into our newsroom, whether they're staff or freelancers who come from a range of backgrounds, geographic, racial, ethnic, gender, all of those things, because we're trying to produce content that reflects a broad range of the state and of the country. This summer, we'll be hosting an intern from the Ida B. Wells Investigative Reporting Center that was started by Nicole Hannah Jones. We'll have another intern from Loyola Marymount University, which is one of the colleges in this region that has a journalism program. So we also see as part of our mission training young journalists from a very diverse set of backgrounds, not just on how to do the craft of journalism, but how to produce equity focused journalism, how to look for stories that really tell a larger narrative about what's going on in society. And Capital and Maine has made it its mission to report on the ways in which the city, the state, this country oftentimes isn't living up to its fundamental principles. We also tell success stories. We tell stories of how people are organizing and coming together to solve the biggest problems that we have. And those are two sides of a coin. They go together.
So to fulfill that mission, do you have an orientation or any kind of training for new staff members, the way that you want stories reported on?
We do. And I will say that typically we're hiring mostly experienced journalists, so they already have their craft under their belt. But that said, Capital Maine has its own news culture, it has its way of doing things. And so we spend some time with people who are new to Capital in Maine. We want them to understand our mission in a deep way. And we also want them to understand that our mission is something that is connected to an even larger mission, which is sustaining quality investigative journalism at a time when it's needed more than ever.
So what's your long-term plans for Capital Maine? You say you're always innovating. Do you have a strategy for 2, 5 years or whatever into the future?
We do. We're in year two of a 4-year strategic plan that was adopted in January of 2025. And that plan calls for innovation on multiple fronts. And I would really put the audience expansion at the center of that. For the reasons that I mentioned before, Peter, this is a moment where you just can't be stagnant. You have to be moving forward. And so we envision a significantly larger pool of resources that will be available for us to build our audience over the next 5 years in ways that will ultimately feed into our core mission, which is to report deeply on inequality and climate change and influence the public conversation on those issues. So we want to invest more in video content, in podcast content. We want to invest in strategies that will make sure that we're engaging deeply with the communities that we're covering in a continuous cycle of conversations, including live events and a range of other ways that that will ensure that Capital Maine's reporting is in fact really hitting the nail on the head when it comes to what is happening in poor communities, in precarious middle class communities, in the parts of our city and state and country where people are trying to get ahead, trying to find that elusive path to the American dream. That's the sweet spot for us. And so that will take constant innovation and greater resources in figuring out how to reach those people where they are.
You've been very kind with your time, so I'm going to ask you one last question before I let you go. What gives you hope right now about the future of independent reporting?
There's a lot of things to be hopeful for, and I would start with the emergence over the last decade plus of a really strong nonprofit news sector. I won't say that nonprofit news is the only path forward in the future, but it's an absolutely essential one. The economic models have changed, and if people and leaders want to see journalism thrive as a core pillar of a democratic society, then they need to invest and they need to look at those models that are producing powerful journalism that can, in fact, sustain democratic norms. We're seeing a lot of that. There are hundreds now of nonprofit news organizations, newsrooms that once were for profit and couldn't survive anymore that have converted to a nonprofit model. And I will say also, Peter, that although there's not enough investigative journalism, there is there's a dimension of the nonprofit news renaissance that is very strongly focused on investigative accountability reporting, which at its core is about making sure that someone is watching those with power and giving an opportunity for those without power to have a say. And so the investment that we've seen, it's not nearly enough. But the fact that there are investigative newsrooms now across the country doing powerful reporting is, to me, a sign of hope and a reason to be optimistic, even as those of us who have made this our path spend every day of every week making the case why those of us, whether your income is small, whether you have significant resources, if you believe in journalism as a part of a democratic society, invest in those news organizations that are aligned with your values.
That's a good place to stop, I think, Danny.
Thanks for the opportunity, Peter. I enjoyed it.